Second, I think you got to face some facts. I did this past week, so I finally caught COVID after 2 years.
I probably gave it to you.
Yeah, you might have actually. and then, having come out of it, I was tired. But coming out of those days, I started to pray again, and I was feeling like, man, I am miserable. Like I am really, I'm angry at a lot of little things. I don't know if anyone else gets this way, but I'm just angry at a lot of little things. So I sat down and I started to say, what am I angry about? And so I wrote them down. I wrote like 5 things down, things I was frustrated with or angry about. And then it hit me. I know what my problem is. You are feeling sorry for yourself.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we uncover the principles behind the plans. As always, we're your hosts.
Yeah, my name is Jeff, and this is my son Dave, and we're both pastors at Allison Park Church, and we are loving this time that we get to spend in this conversation with you.
Absolutely. So thank you for listening. We want to start, again, giving thank yous to those who have been generous enough to leave us 5-star reviews. That's a huge way to help us spread the word. So this week we have one more come in. We want to say thanks to Criggle for your awesome...
Pastor Craig Riggle, right? New Life Church in Ford City. We appreciate you so much for your kind words and that 5-star review.
Yeah, and we will always continue to say thank you for listening. If you want to leave a review, we will absolutely shout you out because that's a huge part of spreading the word. So Thanks for joining us. Today we are on episode 2 of our 3rd season. It's fun to be back.
New studio digs. We're having a good time with this season 3.
So today we wanted to talk about sort of something that was kind of on your heart to share when we had our Ignite conference a little bit ago. But basically the general idea is weathering the wilderness, whatever that might look like in life.
Yeah, so first, it was so great to be back together. We haven't had our Ignite conference in a couple of years because of the endemic. So on Wednesday, January 26, 2022, we had leaders from all over the place come in together, and we had our final day of 21 days of prayer and fasting, and kind of had a conference / prayer meeting day. And as a part of that day, I kicked off the morning with a teaching out of Psalm 84 that deals with sustainability, longevity, and what to do when you find yourself in a dry season in life. And the thought was birthed out of, George Barna has helped the church world by doing a lot of surveying, especially during the pandemic, but he's really been doing this for years. And one of the things that they took a survey at the beginning of 2021, and they discovered that 29% of pastors or people in ministry at that time, January 2021, were thinking about quitting or leaving the ministry. Then they took the same survey in the fall of 2021, and they discovered that number had jumped almost 10%, 38%, or almost 4 out of 10 people who were in the ministry were seriously considering quitting. And so that's a challenge. So as I was talking to leaders, I realized that, okay, there are a lot of weary people out there who've been walking through this wilderness of the last 2 years, along with a lot of personal challenges. And a lot of people are wondering, how can I keep going? Should I keep going? Do I really want to keep doing this? And that's just not leaders in ministry.
Yeah.
In the culture, we are facing something they're calling the Great Resignation,
right,
where a lot of people are leaving whatever they were doing before, and they're in some kind of transition. During the pandemic, there has been a huge increase in mental health issues. People who are thinking about taking their lives. I mean, that's the most kind of severe response to this. So what we want to talk about is, what do we do when we find ourselves in those wilderness spots? And how do we keep on going? And what are the disciplines necessary, habits, or approaches to do that?
I think you hit the nail on the head whenever you said it's not just a leadership thing, because it definitely applies to leaders. We're seeing the effects of what generally our culture is going through with the Great Resignation, with people wanting to quit whatever they might be doing. But I think in general, if you're a Christian, you're probably weary.
If you're not a Christian, you're probably not. You might be weary in your marriage or in your parenting or in your job or in a personal struggle that you're dealing with, or with the isolations that you faced during the pandemic, or with stresses that you're encountering or complications. I mean, that's something everybody always faces. It just feels like it's heavier right now.
Yeah.
And so, learning how to navigate that's a huge thing.
What has been your most weary season you can think of?
There are probably several. mean, this last 2 years has been up there. I mean, honestly, July 2020, I think I was as tired as I've ever been in ministry. It just felt like everything hit at the same time. Early on, having 5 kids and being young in my career or my calling, that was exhausting. Then there's seasons where we face loss and you're dealing with grief, and there's a unique exhaustion that comes with that. But that's where I would say. How about you in your first decade of adulting and leadership and ministry? Have you faced some of that?
Yeah, more than I probably should have. I think some of it's been self-created. I think a lot of my personal weariness has, I mean, obviously there's circumstances like stuff with COVID and the pandemic, and, there's been some tough times in leadership where it is just circumstances because I was doing so much. When I was first starting out, I was doing youth ministry and I was running our Upward basketball program, and I was very new, so things were taking me a lot longer than they should have.
Well, and you were probably in a space too where you were doing a lot of administrative things, and your wiring isn't built that way.
Oh, I'm not an administrator.
So if you find yourself in a place where you're actually out of your gift mix, or you don't really know what your gift mix is yet,
yeah, right,
and you're like, this is not really what I like to do. I think that's a big part of the reason why there's a lot of transition is sometimes you find yourself out of your sweet spot, which can also be very exhausting.
Well, and I think for me, just when I look back on it, one of the things that has made me the most weary, I talked to you about this. There's a book by Gordon MacDonald called Ordering Your Private World.
Yeah.
And he just talks about how whenever things are chaos in your life and you can see them manifest because your house becomes a mess and you have a ton of unfinished tasks, and maybe your desk has a bunch of papers all over it, or your room. I mean, there's a certain level of that's just normal life for me, even in the best of times. But I think like for me, what I would have recognized is my greatest my greatest seasons, I guess, time periods of weariness probably came from whenever I allowed my own personal life to get a little messy and out of control. And, I stopped doing the basics. And so that's actually been one of the big focuses for me this year. Like I've been naming my year now for a few years. And this one, I just felt, what was my specific thing? I felt like God... ordered was my word for this year. Ordered,
cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah, ordered, not as in like I was ordered to do this, not that, but more that things are in place and that I'm taking care of the basics, that I'm doing the right things well.
Yeah.
Because for me, I mean, I guess I'm talking about my own thing now, but I felt like when I've been the most dry and weary, it's whenever I get overwhelmed and I stop doing the little things. And it's like it just gums up my engine and I get depressed. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And I'm not qualified. Nothing I'm doing is working. And look at the lack of fruit from anything in my life. And, I find like my emotions go haywire when so that's probably even more than circumstances. I've noticed that for myself.
Yeah. Disappointment in your own performance in life, your own habits, your own, all of this is a part of, what's involved when you feel like you want to quit.
Yeah. So I think regardless as to what kind of season you're in, if you're hearing the word weariness or fatigue and you have a visceral response, this is for you.
Right. Yeah. And so let's go into the scripture that I think paints the picture of this.
Great.
Okay. Psalm 84 is what I talked out of. And the psalmist talks about, at the beginning, how lovely are your dwelling places, God. I want to be in your presence more than anything else. This is kind of how the psalm starts. And then the psalmist writes, as they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it the place of springs. And the word Baca means to weep or to be in a wilderness place. So as you walk through the valley of the wilderness or of the valley of weeping and grieving, they make it a place of springs. And then it says, the autumn rains also cover it with pools. And then the phrase that really got me, I don't know if you've ever had this experience when you're studying the Bible, but you read through something and it's like it punches you in the gut, like it almost like hits you in between the eyes. The next phrase just hit me between the eyes. It says like this, they go from strength to strength till each appears before God in Zion. And I remember reading that They go from strength to strength and thinking, that's not me, because I don't go from strength to strength. I mean, it almost sounds like superhero Christian. You know, you're flying over everything in life. When they pass through the valley of the wilderness and they're weeping, they make it a place of springs because they are just unstoppable. They always go from strength to strength. And so, I anytime I get a little bit disturbed by a verse, I dig down a little bit to say, okay, what does that mean? And actually, you have this metaphor that it uses. So imagine yourself in a wilderness. There are two ways to find water in the wilderness. One is when the rain comes. The autumn rains cover it with pools. So if you're in a dry place, one response is to wait for God to send the rain. God, I need to be refreshed. God, I need you to send someone to encourage me. God, I need a major breakthrough. God, I need finances to show up in my life. I need a miracle. Okay, I need a confirmation in my life. I need you to give me, impartation of strength. So when the rain falls, it's out of our control. It just sort of happens when it happens. So the autumn rains cover it with pools. But it says, as they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. And the way that you get into a spring is you have to dig down to tap into the water source that's beneath the surface in your life. And so the proper interpretation of this passage is they go from one well that they dug to the next well that they dug. And that gives them the ability to go from strength to strength. It's not that they just have this effervescence about them that carries them through life. It's that they've learned how, when they've run out of water and the rain is not falling and nobody is there to encourage you, to dig down until you hit the source that you need so that you can drink from it. And then you get up and you move forward and you continue through the wilderness until you have to stop and dig down again and find that next water source in your journey.
Yeah, I think, first of all, that's worth watching. You could find this Ignite session on YouTube if you want. But, I think talking through what does it look like to dig this well, is important. But the first thing, you were mentioning this in your message, and when I heard it, I was like, that feels like I can picture myself with this exact feeling. Is like, you mean I have to dig?
Yeah.
like because it's like the last thing you want to do when you're that tired is to have to dig. And that probably is a very accurate representation of the effort that is required sometimes. You're dying of thirst and you feel like I can't go on. It's like, well, the only way to get there is to take that shovel and to start doing the manual labor to kind of dig down into the spring that God has there for you.
Yeah, and you're like, God, if you really loved me, you would send the rain. I mean, where's the rain? I mean, can't you see what I'm going through? And then we hear the Holy Spirit say to us, yeah, get that shovel out. If you just spend a little time, if you just dig down a little bit, you're going to tap into it. And you want to say, but I've been weeping. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I don't want to have to do this work. I want it to be done for me.
Right.
But the only way that you weather the wilderness is if you learn how to manage those moments when you feel like quitting, and instead of quitting, you dig down to find that source that will sustain you.
Yeah.
And it was actually out of that session. So one of the leaders at Allison Park Church, she wrote me and said, is there any way you could talk a little bit about what you do when you dig down? Like, how do you do that to go from strength to strength? What does that take? That question spurred the content for this podcast, because I figured that a lot of people, that sounds very inspirational, like dig down until you find the well. Amen. Praise God. Come on, somebody. But what does that look like, right? How do we end up doing that? That becomes the question.
Yeah, I think the response that a lot of people have is like, well, that sounds idealistic. Like you can do that, Pastor Jeff. Like you've been serving God for so long as a Christian, but then even past that, you're a pastor and your full-time job is learning how to pray. You know what I mean? So I think some people, it's like, well, that's easier said than done. I'm not sure if that's realistic for someone like me, especially in my situation with what I'm dealing and the longevity of this weariness and feels like there's no air. And I'm not sure that me just praying more or whatever it might be is enough. So what does... I guess first question, do you think that that's realistic for people to do, to dig wells for themselves?
Absolutely.
If you're not a full-time,
It's either that or you do end up quitting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's absolutely possible. We all can do this. It is hard work.
Okay, I'll say this. I know it's possible.
Yeah.
I guess the question people are probably asking is, do you think I can do this?
I know you can do this. Come on. Yeah. So, you don't have to do it all by yourself. You can get someone alongside of you to help you and guide you in the journey. But there are some things actually that nobody can do for you but you.
Yeah.
Like other people can encourage you, and that's actually one of those outside sources. But sometimes there's nobody else in the room. There's nobody else in the space. There's nobody else that actually can give you what you need. You have to do it for yourself. And if you don't do it for yourself, there is nobody that will provide that for you.
Yeah, right.
And so God wouldn't call you to do something He doesn't give you the ability to do. He's going to equip you to do this because this is part of how we develop intimacy with Him, is to stop and learn how to dig the well.
Okay, so can I just express, I'm like going through my range of emotions that I've experienced with this.
Yeah.
I think another one is I've tried. You know what I mean? Yeah, it doesn't work for me. Like I can say that because I have felt that, like, well, I've put a lot of stuff into this and it hasn't been enough. You know, I still felt like quitting. And I think especially when it's that chronic sense of weariness, I am constantly on the edge and I've been wanting to quit for forever. And the only reason I haven't quit up till now is blank. Like digging wells doesn't work for me. You know, what's your response if you were to hear that, I guess?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times we measure everything by our emotions, and that's one of the challenges, is to go past what you feel. There are certain things that are true, like you may feel like I can't do this. You may feel like this is never going to end. This doesn't really work for me. But that may not necessarily be accurate. It's so one of the things to weathering the wilderness is you can't let your emotions rule the day, because if you let your emotions rule you, then you will clearly want to pull the plug and give up at some point.
I remember you did a teaching a long time ago in a staff meeting, and I didn't ask you about this before, so you might be like, kind
Put me on the spot.
Yeah, but you did a teaching a long time ago, and you were talking about the reasons for why people feel like quitting. And I remember you talking about one of the things is like you see the calendar and stuff just never ends, and so you start to get discouraged. But you had like a number of other reasons, and you were addressing them. Do you remember
sure that was a really great teaching.
It was a good teaching. No,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh,
Doesn't
so
ring a bell.
there's a lot of things. Okay, I'll never live up to the standard. I will never live up to other people's expectations. I can't keep this up. This is just never ending. I feel like I'm on a merry-go-round. Like, here we go. I'm running on the treadmill. You know, I just got this done and that was really great, but I got to get up and do it again. No one really appreciates this. You know, I poured my life into this person and now they've walked away from me. I can't believe they said that about me. And there's just a whole bunch of things. And then a lot of times it all happens at once.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, and I think some of this too, the devil is very strategic. He knows when you're vulnerable. He knows when you're weak. He knows when you're ready to quit. He knows what your triggers are. And so he'll press the right buttons at the right time to make you feel that exhaustion and weariness is accentuated to the point, because if there's anything he could do to get you to quit, because he knows how dangerous you are to him, he's going to do that.
Yeah.
And so part of the reason why this is a spiritual battle, it's not just people and, you know, sustainability issues and, you know, daily trials. It's also a spiritual warfare thing that we face on a regular basis. And the more you're carrying, the more you're going to face that opposition that comes from powers of darkness.
Yeah, I think in that teaching where you were talking about that, it was one of those fill your tanks, dig a well, right?
Yeah.
But you were using different terminology, and you said, you know, if you're feeling weary because the calendar never stops, you were like, that never stops.
Yeah.
You're like, you know, that's always going to be there. You're always going to be facing whatever is coming up next, and you're never going to be able to just totally relax for 5 years, you know. But you were talking about how you can still feel invigorated and inspired and driven and not always feel tired and exhausted. And I think it was a different phraseology than you're using now.
Yeah.
But so what does it look like to dig wells? Like, you know, in a way that makes sense for somebody who doesn't feel superhuman. Because I think when you do feel weary, you're like, if you could, you know, maybe you can even fake it really well, but it's like if you saw how I actually am, how shriveled and dry I feel, you know, you'd realize whatever. But so what does it look like to dig a well?
Okay, so let's think about the metaphor. As they pass through the valley of Baca, so can you imagine you're going through a desert place. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. Okay, that first thing you got to do is stop. So you've been walking through, and now you got to stop. You got to push pause, and you can't keep moving. You can't keep doing what you need to do. You need to pause to rest and reflect and get replenished. So I think that's the first thing. I think that we can all handle that one. Okay, so slow down and stop for a minute to focus on you.
What does that look like?
Well, that means that you carve out a day of Sabbath. You get some solitude. You get alone to reflect. You pull away from activity. You stop doing email. You don't answer text. You don't get involved with busyness and work projects. You force yourself to have enough space to be able to think. You don't dull yourself out with entertainments and just binge on Netflix and YouTube. You force yourself to have the necessary space in your life to rest spiritually and reflect. Yeah. You can sleep, you can eat, you can go for a walk, but you need to have the quietness around you so that you can really get some time to be replenished. So that's something anybody can do, right? So we stop. Second, I think you got to face some facts. So if we're going to dig down till we tap into the flow of the presence of God, there obviously is something in between me and the presence that I am seeking. So what is it that I'm confronting? When I get the shovel out and I start to dig some stuff down. So what is it? What are the things in my life that are causing me to feel what I feel? And so, I did this past week. So I finally caught COVID after 2 years.
I probably gave it to you.
Yeah, you might have actually. and then, having come out of it, I was tired because I was sleeping more. I didn't have my normal prayer times every day. I was feeling fatigued and grumpy. And there's a good reason for that because it was just, I was sick. But coming out of that, those days, I started to pray again, and I was feeling like, man, I am miserable. Like I am really, I'm angry at a lot of little things. I don't know if anyone else gets this way, but I'm just angry at a lot of little things. So I sat down and I started to say, what am I angry about? And so I wrote them down. I wrote like 5 things down, things I was frustrated with or angry about. No big deals, but they were just whatever reason irritating me at the moment. So I think when you dig down, first you face some facts. What is it that's bothering me? Who is bothering me? Is it me? Is it life? Is it the role that I'm in? And I just wrote them down. And then I started to talk to God about it. So I got into a private place and I was like, God, I don't like this and I don't like that. I was complaining.
Sure.
It's okay to complain a little bit and to vent. And so then I complained a little bit to God. And then I went back and I read a couple of scriptures and I distracted myself and I took a nap. Yeah. When I woke up, I had some more solitude. And then it hit me. I know what my problem is. I didn't want to know what this was because it actually was something I needed to deal with. And I thought all of a sudden, I don't know if this is the Holy Spirit speaking to me or just all of a sudden I had cleared enough clutter to where I was able to self-diagnose. And here's what it was. You are feeling sorry for yourself.
What made you realize that?
I don't know. It's just I had spent enough time venting and thinking about it that I was like, what do I feel right now? And then I was like, yeah, I think I feel self-pity.
So you were like, what was going through your mind? Like
nothing. No, I had. This is the point. I had cleared the clutter.
Okay.
I was just taking a walk. I was out with Emmy. We were walking to get the mail. By the way, I had my mask on and I wasn't seeing anybody that I shouldn't see. Right? Sure, okay, because I was recovering. But I was just outside. No one else was around. So it was like when I wrote my first 5 things that I was irritated about down. That was like the first layer that I had dug out.
Yeah.
Once I got the first layer out and I got the shovel again in solitude and I looked down, I realized, oh, yeah, that big rock that's right there that I got to dig out, that's the self-pity rock. Mm-hmm. As soon as I dug that out and I was like, God, I'm sorry. I'm feeling sorry for myself. What's wrong? You know what? Thank you, God, that you give me the chance to be alive during this season and to lead right now. And I know that I'm exaggerating some things in my mind. I trust you with this. So then I wrote some things down in my journal. I reflected on what I was feeling, and I wrote a prayer to God, offering that self-pity boulder.
Yeah.
And it was like I lifted that off my chest and put it in his hands. And as soon as I did that, I felt the trickle of the spring, right?
Right.
It started to come up through the cracks, and I could feel like, yeah, I can feel the presence of God again. This is good. Boy, did I need to surrender that. Now, there have been times in my life when I've dug down a little bit, and I could not figure out what it was.
Right.
You've probably had this happen too, right? You dig a little bit and you're like, I know I'm screwed up somehow. I know something's not right inside. I know I'm thinking about something wrong, or I'm thinking about myself wrong. And sometimes you have to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And especially,
usually that's, I just didn't get there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I've ever had that where I stay and I'm like, I still have no idea. But it does take some steps, like what you're probably about
yeah,
to
and
say.
especially if I'm more of an inward processor, but if you're an outward processor, you might not be able to self-identify just from alone time. You might need to have a key person in your life, a life partner, a friend, a counselor, who you say, I know my inward wiring is all screwed up right now. And I've hit my first layer, but I need your help in diagnosing what's in the way.
That sounds convenient to be an inward processor.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't do that.
Yeah.
No, I have to talk about it.
But even inward processors get stuck.
Yeah.
And I have had multiple times with a counselor or a life coach where somebody asks the right question in the right way and you go, And so I remember when I sat with a counselor a number of years ago, I hit the boulder of fear of failure.
Right.
Like he said, I think what your problem is you're afraid to fail. And I remember being angry at that. Like, how dare you say that about me? But he was correct. And once I identified that and surrendered that, there was a release that came. So here's a reality. The Holy Spirit lives inside of every believer, and he is always wanting to supply you what you need. Like Jesus said, out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water.
Yeah, right.
When that river is not flowing, and not providing you with the joy and the peace, it's because there's a clog in the pipes.
Yeah.
And you got to dig down and find out what that clog is. Once you turn it over, then all of a sudden there's this surge of life that happens again. It could be bitterness. It could be self-pity. It could be fear. It could be believing something that's not true about me or about God or about the world or about my calling. But you can't just skate over the surface of that. Unless you dig down and pull it up from the roots. It will continue to drag you down. Even if the autumn rains come and they fill you with refreshing for a moment, as soon as the rain stops and you keep walking, if you're carrying that boulder around in your chest, you have to deal with that or it will eat your lunch.
What I'm picking up from what you're saying, in case this is not apparent, is that so much, actually probably 90% or more, is not our circumstances. It's the things that are the unprocessed toxicity that we're dealing with that maybe aren't even our fault in a sense.
No, true.
They're just like, it's almost as like, when your muscles build up that lactic acid and you have to massage them or get an ice bath, it's just because of use. And I think because of life, we can have unprocessed toxicity in the form of emotions that are undealt with.
Sure.
But it's like if you don't deal with them, that's usually the stopper. And I think that at least my natural response and what I think is a very normal response is to think until I get clear from some things, until I have no pressure at all, I'm not going to heal. I need time and space and no pressure and nobody screaming in my ear and nobody expecting anything more of me and none of my people in my congregation calling me with their issues because I can't even fix my own. I think we feel like we need like space and everything. But what I hear you saying is that you can actually dig to get refreshment simply by dealing with those things that you don't really want to deal with. That might take some painful reflection, that might take some phone calls. If it's bitterness, bitterness sucks to deal with.
Yeah, and so it's wounds we're carrying. So your soul collects stuff every day. You walk through life, and somebody says something, and it collects.
Yeah.
And you remember something, and it collects. And then you have a lie that you believe, and it collects. And then you have this severe wound that you thought you had recovered from, and somebody does something that feels like it felt like, and it collects. And if you don't take the time to clear all that gunk that gets inside over a period of time, before you know it, you have got a cobweb worth of crap in there.
Yeah.
And again, maybe it's nothing you did. That maybe it's something that it's all been done to you, or it just happens to be your default of the way that you think or react. Then if you make some bad choices and you feel guilt and shame, like you end up doing something you ate something you shouldn't eat, you drank something you shouldn't drink, you looked at something you should look at, and then the devil puts all the guilt on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
You got some digging to do.
Yes, sometimes I do think it's living in distance with our values. And so you're like, not only am I so tired, but I also have this other side that if anybody saw, there's like almost this fear of keeping up an image and not letting anything drop. And so I do think that there can be a lot, but basically it's digging is processing through the stuff that maybe we're avoiding dealing with because we feel too busy, or it's too painful, or it's inconvenient,
And then here's the lie. Here's the myth.
Yeah.
If I just left this job, this marriage, this ministry position, and went and did something else, everything would change. The only problem is you take you with you wherever you go. And so you might change locations and you might feel, okay, here I am. I went on vacation for a little bit. Look, I don't feel this, but you're still there. Yeah. Whatever the gunk is in your soul, you're going to carry it with you to wherever you go. And it will end up undermining your joy and passion and purpose and direction until you deal with it.
Yeah, right.
And so you can't just ignore it without it eventually, coming up on you and causing you to want to quit. So after you stop and then face the facts and start to process the pain, surrender it to God, and you start to feel the flow of the presence of God again, and the joy comes back and the peace, then you got to worship your way into the place where that river inside is a raging, flowing, waterfall geyser, where you're like, I am not just did I tap down to where I feel a measure of peace, I turned it all over to God. And I now have spent enough time in his presence where I feel like not only do I want to go on, I feel joy about the future. I feel excitement about what my calling is. I'm ready to go back and raise my kids and love my wife and do the things that I need to do. And that's where we want to get to, not where we do enough to barely tap the flow so that we feel like we can eke out another day, but where we really truly have been, like it says in Psalm 23, he restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. So there is this place where he leads us into the place where we're restored and strengthened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we can do this. This is the hard work of dealing with the issues of your soul. And part of the reason why I addressed this at the Ignite conference is that I have now been at this for over 30 years in the same place, in the same position. So same wife, same church, same role, same family. And the only way that I have sustained this over that 3 decades is learning how to go from strength to strength. Not that I'm a superhero and I'm always feeling like I'm on top of the world, but I've learned how to dig a well.
Yeah.
And if I face another crisis or another wilderness, I know I can dig a well. I know that. And then there's these moments where God sends the autumn rains and you get like, oh man, my circumstances are wonderful and I'm seeing all this breakthrough and I just love life. And right now everybody seems to be happy with me and I'm happy with myself, right? And then there's moments of wilderness and no one goes, without the seasons of the Valley of Baca. We all have to walk through those.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, man, when I think about this, like we talked about this at the very beginning about that reluctance to want to dig when you're this tired. I think it adds a compound layer when digging is being like, oh, you mean it's me? And especially whenever you feel like it's not your fault that you're here. Like, well, it's because of the wounding. I've been burned, or you don't understand what my spouse is like, or whatever it might be, what the people in my church have done. And then it's dealing with those things. So when you're saying you take you with you, sometimes it feels like, but they're the issue. But even if somebody else is causing an issue, ultimately what is the dry ground that needs to be broken is our own toxic emotions or our wounding or our whatever it might be. Our fatigue is often just those burnt out rubber emotions that now need to get replaced. And I feel like when I think about that context, like digging is getting into all of that stuff. It's like, you're already exhausted. That is so much, but it is so freeing. You asked earlier, like, what was my biggest time of fatigue? And I was thinking about it. I think I always go back. There was a season in youth ministry at the beginning when I was feeling so much pressure constantly From nobody, probably. Well, maybe some from organizational stuff, but probably mostly from me, because it wasn't like somebody was on my back every week, like, what's going on? I actually was doing fairly well at the time, I think, for what my bosses were hoping from me. But I just never felt happy. I was so frustrated. This is like me in hindsight. I couldn't have told you this at the time. I knew I felt discouraged. I knew I felt burnt out. And I remember being on a missions trip to Boston with a group of youth students. And I was talking to somebody on the phone because I was just like, I was almost like at the brink of tears. Like, I just feel so frustrated. I don't know if I can do this. I'm so tired. And as I was having this conversation, I realized I don't know that it's anything that I'm doing or not doing. It's that I'm never satisfied with like how well I've done. So like at the time we had just put on an outreach, and I wanted a certain number of students, and we got close, but we weren't quite there. And I poured so much into this event. I was working overtime for like a month and a half in advance, and I wanted to be perfect, and it was really great. But we ended up with like 25 less than I wanted. And so I felt so discouraged. And when I was done, Josh, who was the other youth pastor at the time, was like, are you crazy? Like, because 45 people had gotten saved. I mean, it was like a third of our crowd or something had like raised their hand to give their life to Jesus. But I was so mad, you know what I mean? And so I realized this is something within me that I think I'm looking for a certain amount of validation. Like I can hit this and I can be successful. And whenever I put my best effort in, I can rise up to the call that God has in my life, and I can make a difference in the world. And it was like, after all that I did and my very best punch, I still missed it. But I wasn't able to see, the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And it was like robbing me of my joy. And it was stealing the life from me. And that was a hard realization. Like, this is my dissatisfaction and discontentment with what God has given me. And I don't have to prove to myself or to anybody else or be valid by, achieving. It's just by being faithful with what God's giving me. That was hard. It was like letting go of something.
You dug a well.
I dug a well.
Yeah. And you know what you just described is what so many pastors and leaders have felt during the last 2 years, because your people are staying home. They're afraid to get sick. They're taking protective measures. You can't, if you're a goal-oriented person, all the measures and standards and goals that you used before don't work anymore. And now you're relearning how you do ministry. And so it messed with a lot of us that way. And then the standard of comparison on Instagram, you see what your friends are doing and what their most successful moments, and you're comparing yourself. And next thing you know, this is a toxic thing that you're carrying inside. It just becomes a part of it. So I would say to anyone who's listening to this, and you're in the middle of the Valley of Baca, and you got to dig down, and you really don't feel like it, and you're tempted to run away because you just want to distract yourself to do something else other than have to think about this. Here's the deal. So you want to be a leader. The very first task you have is to lead yourself through this.
Or how about this? You're called to be a leader.
Yeah, called. So yeah,
because I think a lot of, at least I'll talk about my
I don't want to be one anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to be a leader. I just get me out of here.
If you could lead yourself through the Valley of Baca, there is nothing that can stop you.
Wow.
If you know how to dig a well, there is no wilderness so dry that it can cause you to miss what God has called you to do.
Wow. Yeah.
But if you don't learn how to dig a well, it may not take much to slow you down. And remember that the devil knows how to push your buttons and use your triggers. He knows how to use your insecurities against you, how to bring up old wounds against you. And he knows that maybe just a few steps from here, you're going to have this amazing breakthrough. If you could just keep walking a little bit further, you might just be an inch away from one of the biggest breakthroughs in your life.
Yeah.
But you won't be able to get there unless you dig the well to be able to keep going in your journey.
Can I just expand on that myth you're talking about if I get away?
Yeah.
I think what I've noticed is there's a lot of people, when you're younger especially, and you probably noticed that, I'm sure it goes beyond what I'm thinking, but I'm just talking from my own life experience. And it's like you think, well, there's two ways I could deal with this. One way is I dig this well, which I don't want to do. The other way is I get out of here. But the thing is, I think it's actually not two alternate ways to get relief. Like the relief that you're seeking really only comes when you dig that well.
Yeah.
people when they get away are bouncing from like discontentment to discontentment.
Yeah.
And I've noticed there's a lot of like, especially for young adults, you end up kind of wandering a lot. And it's like, yeah, I was there, but then this happened. And I was here and this happened. And it like compounds. And I'm seeing people that feel like they never get relief.
Yeah.
And they end up feeling just like, why is my life like this? And they end up blaming a lot of other people. And it might be that they have been hurt by people and they have legitimate pain. But I think it is a myth to think, well, there's two alternatives.
Yeah.
The hard way is what you're talking about.
You know what? I'm going to totally get this wrong, and maybe you'll know the proper names for all this, but I just watched the original Matrix. Okay. And there is this moment that happens towards the end of the movie.
No, keep going. Okay.
Not the red and blue pill,
Okay.
but this moment where the one guy is like the Judas and he portrays everybody so that he can go back into the Matrix and live in his delusion. Remember that?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So like this is actually the choice. If you don't learn to dig a well, you will just live in your own delusion.
Yeah.
You'll create a virtual reality for yourself where the myth is that if I just move over here, everything is going to be good. And you're going to be chasing this myth of fulfillment rather than real fulfillment, which comes when you dig the well and face the junk inside and tap into the presence of God and get whole and restored. But then you're still in the Matrix.
Yeah.
Okay, Neo, you got to solve this puzzle. I mean, you got to learn how to overcome the Matrix. But the only way you learn to live in reality, not in delusion, is to learn how to dig a well in the reality of the wilderness you're in. And because the world around us is the Matrix, it's burnt over. I mean, we live in a terrible, sin-cursed place where there's a lot of pain, and God has called you to be a part of making a difference. But the first thing you got to do is learn how to lead yourself.
Okay, so let's go back now to your original answers. Okay, to talk about, because we've been through a lot of this. So bullet point it for me, and maybe we can even add some things that we might not have said yet. What are the steps? We're talking about you're fatigued, you're burnt out, you're trying to figure out how do I weather this wilderness.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you do?
Stop.
Okay.
Get alone. Get enough quiet around you where you can reflect and rest and be replenished. That would be step one, right? Step two, face the facts. What is it that's bugging you right now? Write it out. Write the list. Write what are your things you're ticked off about, okay? What are you frustrated over? What are you hurt over? Okay, so number three, figure out what's beneath that.
Yeah.
For me, I said it was self-pity. Now, that may involve a counselor, a coach, a pastor, a friend, a conversation, writing in your journal till you deal with that.
Sure.
Okay. So we said slow down and get alone. Face the facts. Deal with the big boulder.
Yeah.
What's that lie you're believing or that wound you need to deal with or that bitterness you're carrying? Number four, surrender it to God.
Yeah.
Put it in his hands. Let him heal you. Let him restore you. And then number five, worship your way into a place of peace, into a place of joy, into a place of recovery and restoration. And then repeat. Walk forward a little bit more, and when it gets dry, you got to repeat that same thing over. And you're actually going to go from strength to strength, from well to well, from one moment of doing those steps to the next moment of doing those steps until you get to heaven, until you die and you transition into the next life. This well digging process never ends. It's never like, well, I did that 2 weeks ago. I was really good back then. I should be fine. No, if your soul collected a bunch of gunk and you're feeling weighted by it, you probably need to stop and do this over again.
Yeah. So for those who are maybe feeling like you're facing their first major, maybe you've had other things like this, but your first major wilderness season, and there's no water in sight, and it's like God hasn't sent the rain, and you're just like, and you're hearing this. I think one of the things might be like, I'm not sure if I could live a life of digging wells. Does it get easier? Is this something that as you do it,
the skill becomes familiar.
Okay.
But the process doesn't. Like when it's dry, and when you're hurt, you're hurt, and when you're grieving, you're grieving. I can't say that gets easier. In fact, the longer you're at it, and the more God is using you and working through you, it tends to be the more He trusts you with bigger challenges.
But knowing you can handle it, right?
Yeah, knowing you're actually developing proficiency, so that it's not like as you get good at digging wells, what actually happens is your life gets easier.
Right.
It's more like as you get good at digging wells, God trusts you with drier places and bigger challenges, because he's trying to use you to do great things. So you see, a lot of us I really want God to do something. I want to make a difference in the world. I want to fulfill my calling. Okay.
Yeah.
That involves you leading your way through some of this stuff. You can't escape the need to learn the skill of digging a well. But once you get familiar with that skill, there shouldn't be anything that you face in the future that should be so alarming. You know you can get through this.
Okay.
Because that skill never leaves you.
Okay, so we'll go back to my thought then here. You're facing your biggest first thing. Yeah. Maybe it because you don't all say maybe it's not even your first, but it is you don't have this muscle memory developed. You're not used to digging wells. You're hearing this and you're like, I need this. I want that relief, but
you need a lot of input from other people.
What is? I'll say my question for you though is, what's that thing you'd say to that person? Like who's feeling this? Like I'm intimidated, but I want to go for it.
You need your prayer partner, life coach, counselor, pastor, small group leader, friend, who's going to be with you. So every step along the way, you're going to need to pause and get a little feedback. So I stopped and it took a day and I don't feel any better. What should I do next? And then they're going to say, well, have you wrote down what's bothering you? Right? Okay. Yeah, I can do that. So I wrote these 5 things. Does this sound right to you? Like you might need someone that's going to help guide you through. Now, there is a difference between getting someone to coach you through the digging of the well and someone who will dig the well for you.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of times we go to somebody hoping that they're going to prophesy to us or speak to us or say something to us that will make us feel all better. That is not what you need right now. You don't need someone who will do it for you. You will need someone who has dug a well before, who can say, oh, yeah, you need to get the pick out for this part. Like you're using the wrong tool. Yeah, you got the shovel there, but this is hard rock you're digging into right here. Yeah. So you need the pickaxe for a little while. So you're going to need someone who's done this before to help guide you through it, to be your cheerleader and your coach and your guide. So, and then when you finally hit the spring, when the well starts to flow, then you'll go to your prayer partner, coach person, and you'll be like, thank you so much. I feel so much better. Yeah. Right. But this is not a do it for me. Can I just take a pill here and make it all better? Yeah. This is learning how to do this for you with some guidance.
Yeah. Well, as we close, I just want to say you can do it.
You can do it.
God
don't run to that old thing you used to run to, because that's just going to make it worse.
Like the coping mechanism.
Yeah. If you go use whatever you used to use, or you distract yourself, you numb yourself out with whatever you used to numb yourself out with, what you've done is you added a layer of rock that you're going to have to dig down through. Yeah. So you might as well do it now. Yeah. Because delaying it is only going to make it worse.
Yeah. I know I'm throwing one extra thing in here at the end, but it just reminded me of this. In the study of addiction, they say that, and this is any coping mechanism. It doesn't just have to be substances, but anything that people go to get relief. They say that the minute that the age that you start using whatever your coping mechanism is, that could be escaping into binging stuff. It could be substances. It could be pornography or whatever. Right. The minute that you start to do that at that age, you stop emotionally maturing.
Wow.
Because and in some ways, because what you're doing, so let's say at age 11, you started to use drugs, for example. And then every time you start to feel really bad, you go and you only really developed the emotional maturity of an 11-year-old in some ways, because your coping mechanism is now to use something instead. So there is a certain, it's almost the same
thing. So it becomes the ceiling on your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you start to overcome your temptation to run to that, then you finally grow up.
Yeah,
and grow out of that.
And there is that whole thing with friction and momentum, right? That it's always hardest to get an object to move at the beginning. Yeah. And then once it's in motion, it gets easier because it's already moving and they already have that energy going that direction. So it is a battle to even get started, but starting is the hardest part.
Yeah. So it really fits in that James 1 where it says, consider it joy whenever you face trials of various kinds, because the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Right. And perseverance must finish its work so that you'll be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So the well digging process makes you into an unstoppable human being. You become strong. You become somebody who can face down whatever wilderness comes in your life, because God has given you capacity. Yeah. Whereas if you run away, you never build capacity. But if you run to God rather than running away from Him, and you learn how to dig a well in the midst of that, you get tremendous capacity.
Yeah,
and then you become a source of strength, not just for you, but for everybody around you.
Absolutely.
Then you become a great dad and a great husband or wife or mom or friend or whatever, pastor or leader, business person. So then you have a reservoir from which you can minister to other people. Rather than you always being depleted and needing to receive, you learn how to dig enough so that there's an overflow for you to be able to give out.
Yeah, it's worth the fight. You got this. God has a call on your life. We just want to impart that to you. You know, going from strength to strength is for you if you're listening to this. We really believe that. That's part of why we're doing this podcast, because we believe God has this almost as a prophetic word for your life, that if you're weary and you're trying to weather the wilderness, dig a well. God has the spring there for you, right? So
and if you go to Allison Park Church's YouTube page, you can find this along with the other Ignite messages from 2022. January 26th, 2022 is the date you could search for. And you can hear that full teaching as well.
Yeah, and part of leaving an impact is sometimes sharing something like this with somebody who might need this. And so we always appreciate it, but we'll just ask again if you could subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening or watching on, YouTube, Facebook, it's always going to be up there. But subscribe and specifically share with others. That helps us out tremendously to get the word out and to help others, because that's what we're all about here. We're trying to be a resource. So we appreciate you listening. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.